Good afternoon. I'm Chris O'Connor, Principal Investigator of the Heart Failure Collaboratory, and we're here with Heart of the Matter, the Heart Failure Collaboratory podcast. And today's topic at hand is how can artificial intelligence improve the conduct and recruitment in clinical trials? Very exciting time for all of us in medicine, and we have a distinguished panel today, and I'm going to go around the room and ask our panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into the topics. Dr. Cunningham.
Hi, my name's Jonathan Cunningham. I'm a heart failure cardiologist at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, interested in how we can leverage AI to improve heart failure clinical care and clinical trials.
Dr. Martyn.
Hi, Trejeeve Martyn. I'm a heart failure transplant cardiologist at Cleveland Clinic's main campus and director of heart failure population health for the system.
Dr. Bhatt.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ankeet Bhatt. I'm a cardiologist and clinical investigator at the Kaiser Permanente Division of Research with an interest in digital tools and implementation science as they apply to clinical trials.
Elise Shalowitz.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Elise Shalowitz. I'm a senior clinical research coordinator at the University of Colorado.
Dr. Psotka.
I'm Mitchell Psotka. I'm Chief of Heart Failure and Transplant at Nova Shar Heart and Vascular. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Lala.
Hi, I'm Lala. I am a heart function cardiologist at the Mount Sinai Fuster Heart Hospital in New York, and I'm particularly interested in seeing how AI can significantly enhance clinical trial recruitment and increase efficiency, precision, and equity.
And Dr. Jain.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sneha Jain. I am a preventive and general cardiologist at Stanford University, and I spend a part of my time on AI development, deployment, and evaluation within our healthcare system.
Well, fantastic. Well, we know that clinical trials are cumbersome, they're long, they're clunky, they're expensive. I don't even know why we do them the way we do them. And yet there's hope. We think that artificial intelligence, the use of technology to enhance clinical trial conduct is particularly exciting, and there's an enormous interest from the entire ecosystem that participates in the clinical trial world to see if there are solutions to increase the value, that is the quality, increasing the quality, reducing the cost of how we develop therapeutics. One of the missions of the Heart Failure Collaboratory. And John Cunningham, I'm going to ask you to kick it off and say, how can we conduct clinical trials better by using technology?
Well, we're all very excited about the potential of AI and large language models in clinical trials because I think anybody who's used ChatGPT has seen just the incredible explosion in the technical side of AI and the ability of AI language model tools to summarize large amounts of unstructured information and distill them down into something that individuals can work with. And that can work from a recruitment, an adjudication, and a safety lens. And so we've been excited about the potential of AI in all areas of this, particularly in event adjudication for safety and efficacy. So thinking of ways that we can transform the unstructured data from patient notes into efficacy outcomes, safety outcomes, as well as identifying patients who may be eligible for participation in the trial. So I'm really excited about all these areas and eager to hear from the panel on sort of the individual things that you're doing at your own institutions to bring this technology from sort of concept to actual implementation in patients.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's on the sort of on the downside of the clinical trials. Dr. Jain, what are you working on at Stanford that excites you about AI, artificial intelligence, and the way we might improve the ecosystem?
Absolutely. Thank you. Just a couple of weeks ago, we announced a project we're working on called Chatter, CHATEHR, and it's our way of talking with the patient's EHR across all kinds of data, both structured, unstructured, their notes that are in the Epic system as well as in Care Everywhere, which is Epic's, pathway for looking at notes outside of the specific healthcare system, to be able to identify and find information about a patient in a way that's so much more conducive to a busy clinician or a busy study coordinator than typical search. And you can imagine with this system, it can become really easy to identify across very many patients who meets inclusion-exclusion criteria, the best way to contact them. And then it provides a platform and foundation for that kind of work within clinical trials, but then also just care in general. And then if possible, after the podcast, we can share some links if people want to learn further. But that on the technical side is what we're working on. On the non-technical side, or everything else that's needed to help make AI as usable and as effective in our systems as possible. For clinical trials, we're really focused kind of on 3 areas. One is, how do we think about digital strategy and data infrastructure? All of a patient's data that's important does not live in one place, so how do we think about that? 2, how do we think about the business model of clinical trials, which right now is very focused on clinical sites, not really on the patient. And then 3rd, what do we need to think about in terms of the right evaluation and monitoring of AI tools over time to make sure that they are safe, they're effective? What do we need in terms of regulation, not just on a government level, but also within our health systems and our clinical trial platforms?
Well, that's very exciting and really novel, and I think we're going to be looking forward to hearing more about these initiatives from Stanford to move things along. Trey, tell us a little bit about where you think AI could fit into the clinical trial ecosystem and improve it.
Yeah, I think that when you think about the conduct of clinical trials, I think like every domain in healthcare, people are being asked to do more with less resources. And so I think there's a lot that we have to think about in terms of the shortage of research coordinators, for example. If they are given a list of MRNs, for example, of patients who could be eligible without any of the justifications to go along with it, they're not going to use it. And I've actually had that experience more on the structured data side in the past. And so if what we need is a user interface that actually cuts down time for research coordinators and provides valid justifications using AI and LLMs in order for it to be used. I think the opportunity is huge because the way we still recruit for the majority of our clinical trials is through the contact with the PI or co-Is who are aware of the study. Direct clinical contact. That's still the bread and butter of clinical trial recruitment for most of the country. Now, how do you capitalize on the broadening of the search using LLMs? You actually need to come down in the time used in other circumstances. And I think for the recruitment standpoint, I think that's the screening portion. And what we've deployed a technology within our health system, within our firewall, a proprietary LLM called Synapsis AI from a company called Diania Health that has been able in our system, after doing some mapping of where structured data lives, be able to combine structured and unstructured data. And we've used them to recruit for several trials, including a study I'm involved with called Depleter, which is amyloid fibril removal in TTR amyloidosis. And what we found is that when you deploy this technology, you can actually increase diversity racially and in terms of identifying variant amyloid, but also find those who may not necessarily be seeing our advanced heart failure group. So both geographically and racial diversity with increased recruitment. So I think it's an exciting technology, but we still need a lot more kind of ways to disseminate, ways to operationalize the technology and make sure that our research coordinators are brought along the way in terms of providing feedback to the vendors.
Those are terrific points. So we can eliminate perhaps some of the biases that are inherent in our current way of recruiting by taking this more structured approach. Ankeet, I'm going to ask you about take us one step even before the recruitment, and that's protocol design. We as you know, you've been involved in designing protocols, and we get into this big event of inclusion, exclusion criteria, and before you know it, everything is put together as a very complicated protocol. Can we use AI, predictive analytics, to say, listen, historically, these are the patients that are going to be excluded based on these factors or included. These are the patients that are going to drop out because they couldn't adhere to the protocol. Can we use that type of approach to design better protocols?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think it's a wonderful point. I really see the vision for AI across the clinical trial ecosystem. Trey and John and others have really mentioned how it might hyperpower sites to be more effective, to use their site coordinators more efficiently and recruit at a greater speed. Also, I think clinical trials have the power, now that real world data sets are being constructed at scale. The application of AI to those types of data sets may better inform clinical trial protocols, the ambient event rates with contemporary guideline directed medical therapy for many of the conditions in cardiovascular medicine that are moving more quickly. And then also from a sponsor standpoint, sponsors are conducting clinical trials across many sites. Some of them are conserved. They use the same sites for many of their clinical trials, and using AI to power both the analysis of which sites to pick and which protocol amendments to make. If they made a particular amendment to their protocol and could see how that might change the number of potentially eligible patients at sites they use frequently, that could be very powerful for those study leadership to make a decision based on data rather than our current structure, which is less data driven, and actually speed up the recruitment in clinical trials and make in-trial planning. So I see it as AI really being transformative across the ecosystem, from trial planning to trial recruitment, and as John mentioned, trial adjudication.
I mean, they're really important points. If you think about, and we've talked about this in collaboratory meetings, the TopCat trial, the Data Safety Monitoring Board, this emerging data coming in from Georgia and Russia that didn't quite look right, but was coming in really fast. And the native eye of the human eye could not pick up the patterns fast enough before there was the wash-in of all these patients randomized. It really took down an important trial. Elise, I'm going to ask you. You're the one that's on the front line of all of us on this call, and you're faced with running and conducting the monitoring audits and the monitoring sessions when you're doing a clinical trial as someone who's on the front line. How can AI, you think, help monitoring in the conduct of clinical trials? So much of it's labor intensive. It's like the most expensive part of running a clinical trial.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if we'll be able to solve it, but I think that just bringing forward the data, like we spend so much time digging through charts and looking through notes and trying to aggregate structured and unstructured data and bring everything together. So I think that if there's a tool that can really, surface everything in one, summarized format, we've talked a lot about that, like the chart chat sounds so incredible for that purpose, where you can kind of bring all the points rather than kind of in your head bringing the notes and the structured data into one place. I think that's where it could have a really great impact.
Any other aspects from your point of view, being so close to the front line, that you think AI could help with the conduct of trials?
I think with recruitment, we've touched upon it a little bit already today. Just, targeting those diverse and rural and community health system, affiliates, because we are only limited to those, like you guys said, that the PIs, really touch with, but being able to disseminate, through BPAs or CDS alerts to providers who may not necessarily be so in tune to the clinical trials underway, and kind of bring forward those patients who may not necessarily be at the academic center, so that we can screen more broadly and more equitably across the entire health system.
Now, because I write Dr. Psotka's paycheck, I can ask him any question I want. And, Mitch, the concept of not eliminating controls, but maybe augmenting controls with the concept of digital twins. What in the world is that, a digital twin? And how can we get to a point where we don't have to utilize so much energy around control groups the way we do now?
I'm so glad you asked me, Chris. So, the idea, and I think if we just take a step back here, the the potential that with which AI is talked about in general and in the clinical trial space is often grandiose. I think if we look at this concept of digital twins, it really comes from, as you mentioned earlier, that it is really costly to run a clinical trial. In the end, though, the truth is that we still need the data that is generated in a randomized fashion to understand the effects of an intervention on a population of people and whether or not that is beneficial or harmful or really has no effect whatsoever. And the truth here is that, even when you're talking about, I think, the use cases where AI has most of its potential, when that comes to trial recruitment, it still needs to be used as a screening tool that then often requires manual confirmation that the patients are correct. When you get to this idea of a digital twin, meaning you create a digital version of a patient that then you can in silico express a treatment or not and see what happens to them. And you can emulate a clinical trial based on inputting a vast quantities of information, either known from clinical trial data that already exists or from real world data that is being collected, and you can pretend that you know what would happen. That trial in the current setting still needs to be performed because we don't know. We don't have a detailed enough understanding of the physiology of the medicine, of the interaction with the drug, of the side effects, of the off-target effects of a treatment to actually emulate what will happen in silico and know what will happen in the real world. So this idea of being able to eliminate control groups, while a very attractive ideal because it would be astoundingly cheaper than our current clinical trial infrastructure, currently remains unachievable based on our current knowledge and current understanding of how AI works.
Okay, so we're not ready yet, but you haven't given up hope. Anu, where do you think AI could have the biggest impact in our clinical trial ecosystem?
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. I'm so glad we're doing this because I feel like we all are talking about AI and yet we don't fully, we've seen glimpses of it work, but really seeing it in full-fledged implementation in our healthcare system still remains to be seen. I would say Sinai, for example, has an AI institute, a data science institute, and we're seeing pockets of things come up. For example, like Epic Notes, we have an automated generated reply to patients when they send us messages, for example. But it's still, like Mitch just pointed out, it needs that human oversight. To me, what I'm most excited about, many people have already mentioned this, is I oversee our clinical trial coordinators. You know this well, Chris, because you and Mona do such an amazing job with our interns. And they are, especially with heart failure trials, these patients are complex. There's multiple comorbid conditions. There are multiple criteria that need to be met, that are found in unstructured and structured sources. And the screening part is really the pain point. And so I would say mitigating that process would be an ideal scenario. And Trey, we heard, spoke about his experience in this respect. And then also reaching those individuals who are traditionally under-enrolled. I think that's critically important. And then I'm also really excited about this idea of AI enabling deep phenotyping of certain subgroups using multiomics, imaging, longitudinal data to potentially define specific molecular and physiologic subgroups that then we can learn more from moving forward. So I think the promise is tremendous. I am actually optimistic. The question will be how things are implemented and how they're implemented in a way that can be translatable across health systems and not just at Sinai or just at Stanford, but what can we ubiquitously use across all of our healthcare systems such that we develop more of a uniform way of implementing AI across regular care and clinical trial design and enrollment.
Well, that's optimistic and I think hopeful. I mean, I do, EHRs, I think 70% are utilizing Epic. So there's some harmonization of EHRs. And so tools that can go into the EHR and identify patients. Dr. Jain, one of the concerns we have here is that, okay, now there's a tool to identify hypertrophic cardiomyopathy patients. We're doing HC trials. There's a concern about turning this on because we don't have enough physicians to see all those patients if we turn it on and get this tidal wave of activity. And then, what are the liabilities? What are the downsides of misdiagnoses, et cetera? So tell us a little bit about your thoughts on these tools that are doing assisting in maybe rarer forms of conditions that we recruit for in clinical trials.
I am so glad you brought this up. I think that this is critical, right? Because everyone thinks that, oh, we can identify more patients. That's great. But if we don't have the capacity to actually help those patients, what are we doing? So that's why part of I'm glad you brought up HCM in particular, because we've been looking at this with the American Heart Association, and part of what we're starting to do now is create target product profiles for health AI in the same way that there are target product profiles for drugs to try to meet clinical and regulatory guidance, or for public health efforts with the WHO. And by doing these target product profiles, we not only look at the technology, but the workflow in which they're supposed to operate. So for hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, we mapped out the patient journey, if they were identified with or without AI, found the bottlenecks in our system, and identified how well a model needs to work to actually move the needle in terms of mortality or symptoms or whatever it might be. This was for clinical practice. And this blueprint, this target product profile, also allows you to go to your leadership and say, hey, if we turn this on, what's going to happen if we move the lever of capacity, if we hire more APPs in this area, if we increase our echo, capability? And I think that that's been really powerful, because we move from this reactive nature where most of healthcare is right now, where an AI tool is built and then we try to retrofit it into clinical practice, and instead start with what's the clinical reality now? How can AI improve this? And where are we going to run into unintended consequences? And can we build our business and healthcare delivery systems around this? How can we innovate those systems to actually enhance care, especially for these rare diseases? So we've done this for HCM. We've done this now for cardiac amyloid as well. And so that's kind of how we're approaching it.
Exciting. Gosh, can we fast forward and get through all the growing pains and get to the seamless clinical trial that is much easier to do? When you look at what the journey we've been on, these large clinical trials take 5 years, 7 years. You can only do so many of these in a lifetime, and so we have to solve this problem by being able to be simultaneous and doing many trials in shorter period of time. John Cunningham, I'm going to give you the last word from what you've heard. Summarize for our audience what the hope is. What are the challenges?
Well, I think we've heard a number of examples of promising areas, and the sense that now the challenges are less technical and more related to implementation and getting this technology in the hands of practicing physicians and research coordinators to really make this happen. I think there's a number of different pieces of software that can do interesting things, and really penetrating our hospitals is the next step. And I think expanding to some of these perhaps less glamorous but really important clinical trial areas like monitoring really offer some low-hanging fruit to decrease cost, improve reliability, and avoid fraud, while also starting with the task that's easily checkable and really not dangerous to patients or trial integrity at all. So I'm really excited about that going forward.
Well, terrific. Well, I want to thank my colleagues here today for starting the conversation. This is not one that will end anytime soon, but we've started this conversation. This is a major emphasis of the Heart Failure Collaboratory, and I want to thank you here today for being on this podcast, Heart of the Matter, Heart Failure Collaboratory, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.